So, Sarada's had dual MS for a while now. In fact, Sarada unlocked her dual Mangekyo Sharingan all the way back in chapter 79 of part 1 of Boruto, which is not only 22 monthly chapters ago, but also the 4-month break between part 1 and part 2 of the manga, which means we've known that Sarada is a dual MS wielder now for over 2 years. However, it wasn't until the most recent chapter of Boruto's 2 Blue Vortex that we finally got to see what at least one of her MS abilities was. A variant of Amaterasu that instead of creating black flames, creates black holes that she can control what they absorb. However, now that the abilities seem to be rolling out of Sarada's eyes, on top of the fact that we still need to see what her second Mangekyo Sharingan ability is, there's also a lot of people itching to see just what her Susanoo will look like. But when talking about the idea of Sarada and Susanoo in the same breath, it's hard not to think about the fact that Sarada may never achieve the level of Susanoo that people like her father or even people like her uncle achieved. See, because while our understanding of Susanoos and their levels is hazy at best, what does seem to be conventionally agreed upon is that in order for somebody to achieve a perfect Susanoo, they need to be a dual EMS wielder. However, as the only person left on Earth with Mangekyo Sharingan who's not currently trapped inside a tree, Sarada doesn't have a lot of routes to becoming a dual EMS wielder, and in fact, the only route she has requires either her father walking around blind for the rest of his days, or dying. Two things that seem equally unlikely. And thus, the question is begged, how will Sarada ever awaken a perfect Susanoo? To which a fairly plausible response is, she may never. However, there is some routes, and none of them include the death of her father. And today, I want to talk about those routes, but I also want to talk about how those routes may never come to pass, and how the days of the Uchiha of the story unlocking a perfect Susanoo may very well be behind us, because today we're talking Sarada will never unlock the Susanoo. But before we get to theorizing about how Sarada's gonna make her gigantic chakra mech, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And if you guys are looking for an additional NC Hammer 23 video every single week, we are doing the Naruto reaction series in the fourth wall link in my description below. We just finished the Land of Waves arc, the bridge has been named, I cried, it's a whole thing. So, the crux of this video is figuring out exactly what is necessary to unlock a perfect Susanoo. Remember earlier when I said that our understanding of the Susanoo and its level is hazy at best? Yeah, I meant that. See, like I stated earlier, it's pretty conventionally agreed that in order to unlock a perfect Susanoo, and as to what a perfect Susanoo is, we're also kind of in disagreement on that widely as a fan base, that an Uchiha needs dual EMS, or dual Eternal Mangekyo Sharingan, meaning not only do they need to awaken their own dual MS, but they also needed to take another set of Mangekyo Sharingan eyes from somebody related to them and fuse them with their own. And this theory is corroborated by a bunch of Uchiha, but most importantly, Itachi and Shisui. See, both Itachi and Shisui were dual MS wielders, and both of them, at least according to the video games and the filler episodes, were Susanoo wielders with crazy powerful Susanoos, mind you. With Itachi Susanoo being a half-body armored Susanoo that wielded the Yatamira and the Totsuka blade, and Shisui Susanoo being a half-bodied armored Susanoo that wielded a green lance and had the ability to fire chakra senbon. And while both Itachi and Shisui's half-bodied armored Susanoos were crazy powerful, neither of them ever unlocked what we could identify as a perfect Susanoo because they didn't have legs and they didn't have wings. And while armor on your Susanoo is absolutely a prerequisite to achieve a perfect Susanoo, the lack of legs and wings seem to imply that Itachi and Shisui were never able to achieve the highest form of Susanoo. And as the two of them were only MS wielders, this seems to corroborate the idea that you can only achieve the highest level of Susanoo with EMS. On top of this, Sasuke doesn't achieve his perfect Susanoo until he unlocks EMS. And thus, yeah, it seems pretty straightforward, right? With the MS, you can have an armored half-body Susanoo. With the EMS, you can have really whatever Susanoo you want. However, this isn't necessarily a flawless way to think about this problem. See, because both Indra and Kakashi were only dual MS wielders when they used their perfect Susanoos. Kakashi got his Phantom Chakra MS abilities from Obito, whom he was not related to, and also they were using the same set of Mangekyo Sharingan eyes their entire life, and the unlocking of EMS does require 4 eyes, 2 sets of 2, and thus DMS Kakashi is called DMS Kakashi because he's not DEMS EMS Kakashi. He's dual Mangekyo Sharingan Kakashi, not dual Eternal Mangekyo Sharingan Kakashi. And yet he was able to use Perfect Susanoo, and not only just Perfect Susanoo, but one of the biggest ones we've ever seen, with one of the most broken Susanoo weapons we've ever seen. But if he didn't have EMS, why was he able to do that? The same can be said for Indra. Chronologically, from a canon perspective, Indra has the first ever Perfect Susanoo. Yes, Hagoromo in the filler also busts out a Perfect Susanoo, but if we're talking manga canon, Indra has the first ever Perfect Susanoo. But Indra is also technically the first ever canon chronological MS user. Well, yes, it is established that Hagoromo had the Sharingan before he had the Rinnegan in the filler of the Naruto anime. The first ever manga canon Sharingan user is Indra. On top of that, even if we do want to buy into the idea that Hagoromo did have the Sharingan before he had the Rinnegan, that wouldn't matter because Indra doesn't take Hagoromo's eyes. If Indra had taken Hagoromo's eyes, then yeah, maybe he would have been able to evolve his eyes into that of an EMS, but he probably would have just got the Rinnegan because Hagoromo's eyes were Rinnegan. Yes, Indra inherited the power of Dojutsu from Hagoromo, but that doesn't mean that he took his Dojutsu. It just means he got access to Hagoromo's Dojutsu, which is why he was born with the Sharingan. And thus Indra, who also wasn't an EMS user, had a Perfect Susanoo. So now the idea that you need EMS to unlock a Perfect Susanoo seems well, kind of wrong. I mean, yeah, we don't see Madara or Sasuke use their Perfect Susanoo until they get the EMS, but there's also other factors at play here. See, because even the idea that Sasuke gets access to Perfect Susanoo after unlocking his EMS is contentious. There's essentially two camps as it pertains to this talking point. There are those who believe that Sasuke used his Perfect Susanoo for his first ever time in the battle against Jubito, and others who believe that we actually don't see Sasuke use Perfect Susanoo until the battle against Jubidara. The big and very important difference between these two moments being the Hagoromo chakra boost. But let's flesh out both sides of the argument here. See, those who claim that Sasuke used his Perfect Susanoo in the battle against Jubito claim that because Sasuke used a humanoid Susanoo in the battle against Jubito, that humanoid Susanoo is equal to that of a Perfect Susanoo. And I mean, after all, they do kind of have a point here. The Susanoo that Sasuke uses in the battle against Jubito is not only a full humanoid structure with legs and armor, but it also has 4 arms and Sasuke's chakra weapons, like his bow. But it also doesn't have wings, and it's substantially smaller than the Perfect Susanoo we see Sasuke using after the Hagoromo chakra boost. But the logical retort to that retort is the fact that on top of using a humanoid Susanoo in the battle against Jubito, Sasuke also used the majestic attire Susanoo. That is to say that he was able to wrap Kurama in his Susanoo, creating an entity so powerful that they were able to use it to defeat Jubito and rip the 10 tails out of him. And a lot of people claim that this is clear and obvious evidence of Sasuke's ability to use the Perfect Susanoo because Madara also used the majestic attire Susanoo against Hashirama in their final battle while the both of them were still alive. And thus there seems to be a through line here between Madara and Sasuke, with the EMS grants you the ability to apply your Susanoo to other things and also create a humanoid Susanoo. However, at this point, it's important to note that we actually don't see Madara's Perfect Susanoo until his battle against the 5 Kage in the 4th Great Shinobi World War. And by Perfect Susanoo, I'm saying the final form of Madara's Susanoo. See, because just like with Sasuke in the battle against Jubito, Madara uses Susanoo like a ton in the 4th Great Shinobi World War. Whether it's him creating his 2-headed 4-armed Susanoo to call down the meteors upon the Shinobi Alliance, or making shadow clones that are all cladded in humanoid Susanoos, Madara displays a level of Susanoo mastery equal to that of EMS Sasuke, up until he realizes that playing with the Kage isn't as much fun as he wanted, and thus he very much clearly states that the Kage have not seen his full power, or his final form, at which point he summons his Perfect Susanoo. Not just his humanoid walking around Susanoos, his gigantic armored winged Susanoo. And that is the first time we ever see Madara use that kind of Susanoo. And thus, as has been established in both the case of Madara and Sasuke, that there is a form of Susanoo greater than that of the humanoid walking around Susanoo, that begs the pretty easy to answer question: if there's a form greater than that humanoid form, can that form truly be considered a Perfect Susanoo? I don't think so. And as that form seems to be used almost unilaterally with the majestic attire Susanoo, I would also reckon that a majestic attire Susanoo is not a representation of a perfect Susanoo, because just like with the humanoid Susanoo, there's no wings. And thus, if we assume that Sasuke and Madara weren't actually able to use what we've now identified as their perfect Susanoo, not until they got EMS, but rather not until they got Sage of Six Paths Chakra, that actually fixes our problem from earlier. The problem of Indra and Kakashi. See, because while we've already identified the fact that Indra and Kakashi were just MS wielders, they are different from Shisui and Itachi, sheerly based off the fact that both Indra and Kakashi had access to Sage of Six Paths chakra, and thus ironically the only difference between Indra, Kakashi, Shisui, and Itachi is Sage of Six Paths chakra, which seems to imply that EMS actually is not what is necessary to unlock a perfect Susanoo, and rather it's Sage of Six Paths chakra. And in actuality, EMS only unlocks the ability to create humanoid Susanoo or a majestic attire Susanoo. And thus any dual MS wielder who has Sage of Six Paths chakra should hypothetically be able to use a perfect Susanoo. And if that's the case, and I very much believe that it is, that is fantastic news not only for Sarada, but also Sarada fans, because there are very, and I mean very few routes for Sarada to acquire EMS. Those routes being, like we highlighted earlier, either Sasuke going blind for the rest of his life or just getting regular eyes, or him dying, or some Orochimaru / Amado nonsense that everybody probably would have hated. And while sure, it's a possibility that Orochimaru could slither out of a cave and be like, hey, I genetically copied Itachi's Mangekyo Sharingan, here you go Sarada, now you have EMS, except the fact that Orochimaru is very actively pursuing cloning knowledge and wanted Itachi or Sasuke to be their vessel for years, it wouldn't be that crazy to assume that somehow, someway, Orochimaru got their slimy little snaky fingers and made some half-clone that somehow awoke the Mangekyo Sharingan but wasn't strong enough to be used as a vessel for Orochimaru. If we're being entirely real with ourselves here, the most realistic way for Sarada to unlock the EMS is to take Sasuke's eyes, something that almost definitely will not happen, especially when you consider recent events like the unveiling of Sarada's crazy broken Mangekyo Sharingan ability pretty quickly made her very relevant in the grand power scheme of Two Blue Vortex. And therefore, the power payoff of Sasuke's death or blinding wouldn't be satisfactory to those reading it. That is to say that Sasuke's death or loss of eyes, and therefore death as a powerful character, wouldn't equal a sufficient power-up in Sarada that the fandom would be cool with it. On top of this, it is much more likely that Sarada ends up with Sage of Six Paths chakra than the EMS. So how does Sarada end up with Sage of Six Paths chakra? Well, in one of three ways, which we'll go over from most likely to least likely. However, unfortunately, the most likely answer is the most boring, and the least likely answer is the most fun. So buy into whichever one of these theories genuinely you like the most. The first possibility that allows for Sarada to acquire Sage of Six Paths chakra is the fact that she may just already have it. See, if we assume that Indra had access to Sage of Six Paths chakra because his father was Hagoromo, the Sage of Six Paths, then it's not crazy to assume that Sasuke, who received a blessing from the Sage of Six Paths and therefore carried his chakra for the rest of his life, pass some of that chakra down to his children. In fact, the ability to pass down Sage of Six Paths chakra is kind of the leading theory as to why Boruto unlocked the Jogo, as not only did his father receive chakra from Hagoromo, but his mother received chakra from Hamura, and thus the combining of those two chakra forces inside of Boruto and inside of Himawari is why they were born so uniquely powerful. On top of this, the idea that Sarada received Sage of Six Paths chakra from Sasuke is also the leading theory as to why Sarada is immune to omnipotence. See, because while omnipotence is the coding language of the universe that allows for Otsutsuki to really do whatever their imagination desires, it's largely implied that omnipotence doesn't affect other Otsutsuki. And therefore, the reason that Sarada is unaffected by omnipotence is because she got Sage of Six Paths chakra from her father. Now, unfortunately, this theory is kind of hazy when you consider the fact that Sasuke was affected by omnipotence, and in the circumstance, he is the person handing down said Sage of Six Paths chakra to Sarada. But Sasuke was able to be broken out of omnipotence rather easily, and Sarada is still the daughter of Sakura, whose chakra control is so incredibly precise, she literally cannot be affected by Genjutsu. Now, in the case of this theory, quite literally, nothing has to happen for her to get a perfect Susanoo. She is a dual MS wielder, like Indra or Kakashi, and with access to the Sage of Six Paths chakra through the connection she has to her father, whenever she gains enough mastery with the Susanoo, she'll be able to use the perfect Susanoo, like Indra and Kakashi. The second theory hinges largely on Hidari, and the idea of Sarada maybe possibly fusing with him. See, we still don't know a ton about the Shinju. In fact, we know next to nothing. In fact, the only thing we know less about is how to use the Soul Thorn to unlock the people who were caught up in the trees that created the Shinju in the first place. Now, this is probably a question that's going to be answered here pretty soon with the death of Ryu. But as it currently stands, we really have no idea as to whether or not you kind of just shove the Soul Thorn into the tree and the person is released, or what happens. And thus, after after the hypothetical death of Hidari, there is a fair to decent chance that somehow some of the power of Hidari is transferred into that of Sarada. Whether that's her cutting him down and therefore absorbing his power, or just absorbing his soul thorn, if Sarada were to hypothetically absorb power from a Shinju, which mind you are basically walking god trees that are derived from the power of the Ten Tails, and well, neither of those things are necessarily Sage of Six Paths Chakra. Sage of Six Paths Chakra is contingent on absorbing the power of a Ten Tails, and therefore it's basically the same thing. Then Sarada, through this merging with the power of Hidari, would essentially awaken to Sage of Six Paths Chakra that she could hypothetically use to fuel a perfect Susanoo. But what if Sarada went one step further than possibly fusing with Hidari? Let's assume that all of the power of Hidari needs to be funneled back into Sasuke to either make him more powerful than he was when he was put into the tree in the first place, or simply just to break him out of the tree at all. There is somebody amongst the Shinju whose power doesn't come from a person that anybody really needs back, and that person amongst the Shinju is Jura. All this is to say that Sarada could hypothetically become the next host of a Ten Tails. See, I don't think any of us are lost on the fact that the end of the Shinju arc is most likely gonna come about with Jura's death. However, Jura's death does bring forth a couple of interesting possibilities. See, because with all of the other Shinju, when the Shinju like Matsuri or Ryu is cut down, their soul thorn is most likely gonna need to be returned to the tree that the person who created the Shinju is currently locked up in. But that's not the case for Jura. See, Jura doesn't come from a person. Jura is the Ten Tails, but in Shinju form. And therefore, when Jura is defeated, most likely through the combined powers of Kawaki and Boruto, most likely Jura will either leave behind a soul thorn that contains the powers of the entire Ten Tails, or like with every other tailed beast, when Jura is defeated, the power of the Ten Tails will dissipate into the universe. Because as we know from Kurama very recently, tailed beasts can't really die, and the Ten Tails is 100% a tailed beast. And therefore, in order to eliminate the possibility of maybe the powers of the Ten Tails falling in the wrong hands, or maybe even worse, the Ten Tails just reappearing one day somewhere on Earth and wreaking absolute havoc, the most sensible way to deal with Jura is to seal him, or at least his power, away into something or somebody. But here's the thing, there's not a lot of viable options for that. Sasuke's locked in a tree, Naruto is locked in the Daikokuten, Himawari is already the Jinchuriki of Kurama, Boruto has Momoshiki inside of him, and Kawaki is already a Karma user, leaving really the only possibilities for absorbing this power of Jura being Mitsuki or Sarada. Except the fact that Mitsuki probably has I was created by Toneri's DNA reveal somewhere down the line, the more logical landing place for this power of the Ten Tails seems to be Sarada. Now, does this mean that we're gonna get Jubi Rada? No, I don't think so. See, we're not talking about a full-powered Ten Tails here. Even before the Ten Tails was cut down into a million little pieces to create all of the claw grimes, it was still only a juvenile Ten Tails, significantly weaker than the Ten Tails that we dealt with in the Fourth Great Shinobi World War. And thus, if hypothetically Sarada were to absorb the power of Jura to make sure that it was never used by the wrong people, I don't think that her skin would get all white and she would look like Jubito or Jubidara. And if this is hypothetically what happens, Sarada would undoubtedly get access to something very similar to that of Sage of Six Paths Chakra by becoming a Ten Tails Jinchuriki, giving her immediate access to a perfect Susanoo, a crazy chakra pool, and a ridiculous healing factor, which would all but make the idea of her going blind from overusage of her MS irrelevant. And considering the fact that it seemed to be the awakening of the Rinnegan in Madara that allowed for him to use the perfect Susanoo in the first place, something that, mind you, he did before becoming a Ten Tails Jinchuriki, Sage of Six Paths Chakra does seem to be defined in a somewhat loose construct here. And the way that we would talk about it, knowing what we know from Boruto now, is kind of just if you get access to Otsutsuki powers. Be that the power of a god tree, the power of Ten Tails, the power of the Rinnegan, or a direct blessing from Hagoromo. However, there is also the possibility that all three of these circumstances never come to pass. Sarada may never use a perfect Susanoo in the way that Madara, Sasuke, Indra, and Kakashi did. In fact, she may never even use a half-perfect Susanoo the way that Itachi or Shisui did, but not because she's unable to. Fundamentally, currently, Sarada should be able to use a Susanoo at least as powerful as that of Itachi or Shisui, at least in the body that she manifests, not in terms of her Susanoo weapons. However, the Susanoo was pretty immediately identified as no longer relevant in Boruto, when Jigen snatched Sasuke Sasuke out of his perfect Susanoo simply by flying through it and grabbing Sasuke by the face. See, the Susanoo, well, undoubtedly probably the greatest defensive jutsu in all of Naruto, is slow and made of chakra. And in a universe now where Rinnegan are more common than they've ever been, and karma markings grant the ability to absorb chakra, a slow, clunky jutsu made out of chakra is actually more of a hindrance than it is a help. And even the perfect Susanoo, which is undoubtedly the fastest out of all of the Susanoo, is too slow for high-level battles. And mind you, that's high-level battles against foes like Jigen, who most likely wouldn't stand a chance against opponents like Jura or maybe even Hidari. And thus, there's actually a pretty good chance that we never see Sarada use a perfect Susanoo, and rather she invents some other kind of Susanoo, a smaller, quicker, more versatile Susanoo. Maybe one that just manifests chakra armor around here, like that Sasuke fan art from years ago. And this way, not only does she have to dump an insane amount of chakra into generating a Susanoo, she also doesn't have to worry about the fact that using Susanoo is an incredible burden on not only the eyes, but the body. With Sasuke saying that using the Susanoo feels like setting every single cell in his body on fire. But I can't admit that the image of seeing Sarada use a perfect Susanoo is something I really want to see. So here's to hoping one of the theories that I just listed is correct. But what do you guys think? Do you think we'll ever see Sarada use perfect Susanoo? And if we do, how do you think it'll come to pass? Tell me in the comments below. And while you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to go get a haircut. My God, how did I let it get this long?